I'm not leaving you. Maybe you can.
The sound cut through the diner like glass cracking under pressure, sharp and careless, the kind of laugh that didn't ask for permission and didn't expect consequences, and my hands tightened around the edge of the counter as I kept my eyes down, pretending the coffee I was pouring mattered more than the man standing 3 feet away from me. But my heart knew better. It always did when Jason Reed walked into a room. It remembered things my mind tried to bury: late nights, raised voices, promises that never meant safety, and I told myself to breathe, just breathe, because my son was waiting at home, and I only had $43 in tips to get us through the weekend, and I couldn't afford to make a scene. Not here, not tonight, not with every pair of eyes already drifting toward us like they could sense something was about to break. Emily. He said my name like it belonged to him, slow and deliberate, and I hated that it still made my chest tighten. I hated that part of me. Still reacted. Even after everything, I kept pouring coffee, steady, careful, like I hadn't heard him, like ignoring him might make him disappear. But Jason didn't disappear. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the expensive cologne that never matched the man wearing it. "You've been hard to reach," he added, and there it was, that shift in his tone, the one that turned everything into a quiet threat without ever raising his voice. I set the coffee pot down before my hands could betray me, before they started shaking, and finally looked at him, really looked, taking in the tailored jacket, the easy confidence, the way he leaned like the whole world was something he owned. And for a second, just 1 second, I felt small again, like I used to, like I still could be if I wasn't careful. "I'm working," I said, keeping my voice even, polite, like he was just another customer and not a chapter of my life I had fought to close. But his smile only widened, amused, like I'd just told him a joke. "You always are," he said, and his hand brushed the counter, too close to mine, not touching, not quite, but enough to remind me that he could if he wanted to, that he thought he had. That right, and my pulse kicked faster, a warning I couldn't ignore. I stepped back, just an inch, just enough to breathe. "If you need something, you can order like everyone else," I added, because I needed boundaries, even if they were fragile, even if he could snap them without trying. And that's when he laughed again, louder this time, turning heads, drawing attention, making sure everyone knew he wasn't someone to be dismissed. "Call whoever you want," he said suddenly, his voice dropping, just enough that it felt like it was meant only for me, like a secret wrapped in a challenge, and something in my chest twisted, something old and stubborn and tired of being afraid. My fingers brushed against my apron pocket where my phone rested, a number saved there that I had promised myself I would never use, not again, not after everything it represented. But Jason was still smiling, still waiting, still certain I had no one. And for the first time that night, I realized maybe he was wrong. Maybe I wasn't as alone as he thought, and that thought scared me almost as much as it steadied me. I should have walked away when he said it, should have laughed it off like it did not matter, but the words stayed in the air between us, heavy and waiting, and my fingers slipped into my apron pocket before I could stop them, brushing against my phone like it had a pulse of its own, like it knew exactly what I was thinking. And for a second, I just stood there, caught between two versions of myself, the one who survived by staying quiet, and the one who was so tired of surviving that she might actually do something reckless. Jason watched me with that same amused patience, like he had already won, like this was just entertainment to him. And that look did something to me. Something small but sharp. It pushed me over the edge I had been balancing on all night. I pulled the phone out, my hand steadier than I expected, and I could feel his attention sharpen. Just a little, curiosity replacing certainty. "That is cute," he said softly, tilting his head. "You actually think someone is coming for you?" And I did not answer, because if I spoke, I might lose whatever courage had just found me. Instead, I unlocked the screen and stared at the number for a second longer than I should have. The contact saved under a name I never said out loud, a name that carried weight, history, something unfinished. My thumb hovered, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. And then I pressed call. The line rang once, twice, each second stretching thin, fragile, and I almost hung up, almost told myself this was a mistake, that I was dragging something dangerous back into my life for no reason. But then the call connected, silence on the other end. Not empty silence. Not static. Something deliberate, controlled, like someone listening before choosing to speak. I swallowed, suddenly aware of everything. The clink of dishes behind me, the low hum of conversation, the way Jason leaned closer, trying to catch the moment. Say something, he murmured, and I hated that he still thought he was in control. I turned slightly away from him, enough to create space, even if it was only an illusion, and I opened my mouth, but nothing came out at first, because how do you explain this? How do you explain that you are calling someone you promised you would never call again? That you need help without saying the word help? That you are afraid without sounding weak? My throat tightened, and for a second I thought the silence would swallow me whole. And then a voice came through the phone, low, calm, unmistakably present. Who is this? 3 words, that was all, but they changed everything. The air shifted, subtle but real, like the room itself had taken a breath, and I closed my eyes for just a second, steadying myself. It is Emily, I said, my voice quieter than I wanted, but clear enough. And there was a pause, not confusion, not hesitation, recognition, and that recognition sent something sharp and electric through my chest, because it meant he remembered. After everything, after all this time, he still remembered. Jason's smile flickered, just barely, like he felt the shift even if he did not understand it yet. Emily. The voice repeated, slower this time, and I could almost picture him wherever he was. The way he would be standing, still, focused, every detail locking into place. Why are you calling me? And I looked at Jason then, really looked at the confidence that had started to crack around the edges, at the way his posture had changed just enough to betray uncertainty. And for the first time since he walked in, I felt something different. Not fear, not exactly, something steadier, something that felt like the beginning of control. I need you to stay on the line, I said, and the silence that followed was not empty anymore, it was waiting. Jason reached for the phone before I could react, his movement quick but not rushed, like he still believed this was his moment to control, his fingers closing around the edge of the device, brushing mine just enough to remind me of every boundary he had ever crossed without permission. And for a split second my instinct was to pull back, to let him take it, to avoid whatever came next. But I did not move, I held on, because something in the voice on the other end had already changed the rules. Let me hear, Jason said, his tone light, but thinner now, curiosity edged with something sharper, and I did not answer him. I just shifted the phone slightly, enough that he could hear without giving it up, enough that I stayed the one in control of the call, and the silence on the line stretched, deliberate, waiting, as if the man on the other end was measuring every second, every breath, every unspoken detail. You said stay on the line. The voice came again, calm, steady, not louder, not threatening, but it carried something that made the air feel heavier, like gravity had quietly increased. And Jason's smile faded another fraction, subtle, but I saw it. I felt it, because I had spent too long learning how to read shifts like that. Yeah, Jason said, leaning closer, his voice now directed toward the phone. She has company. And the moment the words left his mouth I felt it, a change so slight most people would miss it. But I did not. The silence on the other end sharpened. Not empty, not uncertain, focused. Put her back on. The voice said, still calm, but this time there was no question in it, no space for interpretation, and Jason blinked, just once, like his body reacted before his mind caught up. Who is this? He asked, and I could hear it now, that crack in his tone, small but undeniable. The first sign that something was slipping. I took the phone fully back, not forcefully, just enough to re-establish the line, and brought it to my ear again, my heart steady in a way that surprised me. I am here, I said, and for a second everything else disappeared. The diner, the noise, Jason standing too close, it all faded into the background, because the voice on the other end had my full attention. Are you safe? He asked. Simple, direct, and that question hit harder than anything else that had been said tonight, because no one had asked me that in a long time. Not like it mattered, not like the answer would change something. I hesitated, just for a breath, because the truth was complicated, because safety was not something I had in clear terms anymore. But before I could answer, Jason spoke again, sharper this time. You still have not told me who you are. And there it was, the edge, the attempt to reclaim control, to pull the situation back into something he understood. And the response came without delay, without hesitation, a name, just a name, spoken evenly, Adrian Volkov. And it was like the room itself paused, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough that everything felt still for a fraction of a second. And I watched Jason as the name settled in, watched the recognition spread across his face, slow and unwilling, like he wanted to reject it, but could not. His posture shifted, barely, his shoulders tightening, his expression recalibrating, and for the first time since he walked in, he looked at me differently, not like something he owned, not like someone he could push around, but like a variable he had not accounted for. "That is not funny," he said, but there was no laughter left in his voice, none at all. And I did not say anything. I did not need to, because the silence now belonged to me. And on the other end of the line, Adrian did not repeat himself, did not explain, did not raise his voice. He just stayed there, present, certain, like the outcome had already been decided somewhere I could not see. And in that moment, I understood something I had been trying to forget. Power did not always announce itself. Sometimes it just existed, quiet and absolute, and everything else adjusted around it. Jason took a step back, not far, not enough for anyone else to notice. But I saw it because I was watching him the way he used to watch me, looking for the smallest signs, the subtle shifts that told the truth before words ever did. And his hand dropped from the counter like it no longer knew where it belonged, like the space around him had changed without warning. "You are joking," he said, quieter now, his voice missing that careless edge it had when he first walked in. And I did not answer because I did not need to, because the silence between us had already started saying everything. I could still hear Adrian on the line, not speaking, just there, and somehow that presence felt stronger than anything loud or forceful ever could. "Stay where you are," Adrian said finally, his tone unchanged, calm, measured, like he was giving instructions that did not need to be repeated, and something in my chest tightened at that. Not fear exactly, something closer to recognition, because I remembered that tone. I remembered what it meant when he spoke like that. Things moved, people listened, outcomes shifted, and I had promised myself I would never step back into that world, never rely on it again. But here I was, standing in the middle of it, holding the line open like it was the only thing keeping everything from tipping the wrong way. Jason let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but not quite, like he was trying to convince himself he still had control. "You think a name is supposed to scare me," he said, but he did not look at me when he said it. He looked at the phone, like the answer was going to come from there, like he needed confirmation that this was real. And I watched the moment stretch, watched the certainty drain out of him in slow, quiet pieces. "Give me the phone," he added, reaching again. But this time there was hesitation in it, a pause that had not been there before, and I pulled it back, not aggressively, just enough to make it clear, and for a second we just stood there, facing each other, the air between us tight and fragile, like something invisible had been drawn across the space, a line neither of us could ignore. "Emily," Adrian said, and my name sounded different when he said it, steadier, grounded, like he was anchoring the moment. "Look at me," he continued, and I almost laughed at the instinct to turn, even though he was not physically there, even though he could not actually see me, but I straightened anyway, my shoulders lifting, my breath evening out, because somehow it felt like he could, like distance did not matter in the way it should. "Are you alone?" he asked, and I glanced around, the diner still moving, still alive, with quiet conversations and clinking dishes, people pretending not to notice what was happening right in front of them. "No," I said, and I did not lower my voice this time. I did not hide it, because I did not feel like I needed to anymore. And that was new, that feeling, that shift. Jason heard it too. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened, in the way his eyes narrowed just slightly, calculating now instead of dismissive. "You are making this bigger than it is," he said, but there was no confidence left behind the words, just an attempt to regain something that had already slipped away. And then the door to the diner opened, a simple sound, nothing dramatic, just the soft chime of the bell above it. But the timing made something in my chest still, because it felt like a response, like the world was aligning with something I could not see. And I did not turn immediately. I did not need to, because I felt it before I saw it. The shift in the room, the the subtle change in the way people moved, the way conversations dipped just a little lower, like something had entered that did not belong to the ordinary rhythm of the place. Jason noticed it too, his gaze flicking toward the entrance, and for the first time since he walked in, he looked uncertain in a way he could not hide. And I realized then that whatever came next, whatever crossed that threshold, it was not something he could laugh at anymore. I did not turn right away. I let the moment breathe, let the quiet shift settle into my bones like something I had been waiting for without knowing it. And then I slowly lifted my eyes toward the door, not fully, just enough to catch the reflection in the glass behind the counter. Two men had stepped inside. Nothing dramatic about them at first glance. Dark jackets, clean lines, the kind of presence that did not ask for attention but received it anyway. And the room adjusted around them without anyone saying a word. Conversations softened, movement slowed, like instinct had taken over where logic had not yet caught up. Jason saw them too. I felt it in the way his focus snapped away from me, drawn toward the entrance like something in him recognized what his pride refused to admit. "You know them," I said quietly, not as a question, but as a statement, and he did not answer right away, his jaw tightening, his posture shifting again, recalculating, measuring, the way men do when they realize they might have misread the situation. "This is unnecessary," he muttered, but the words landed flat, like even he did not believe them anymore. I brought the phone back to my ear, grounding myself in the steady presence on the other end. "They are here," I said, my voice calm, steadier than I expected, and there was a brief pause, not surprise, just confirmation, like everything was unfolding exactly the way it was meant to. "Stay where you are," Adrian replied, and I almost smiled at the repetition, at the certainty in it, because I had not moved, not really, not since this started, and now it felt like I did not need to. Like the ground beneath me had finally stopped shifting, the two men moved further into the diner, not rushing, not scanning the room in any obvious way, but their attention was precise, deliberate, and when their eyes landed on Jason, I saw it. The exact moment recognition clicked into place on both sides. Jason's breath hitched, just slightly, his confidence cracking wide enough now that it could not be hidden. "Look," he started, turning back to me, his voice lower, controlled but strained. "We do not need to make this into something bigger than it is." And I held his gaze, really held it. For the first time without that underlying fear pulling me back. "You already did," I said, and the words felt different coming out. Not defensive, not pleading, just true. One of the men stopped a few feet away, not close enough to invade space, but close enough to make a point without saying anything at all. His posture relaxed, his expression neutral, but there was something in the stillness that carried more weight than any raised voice ever could. Jason swallowed, the sound small but noticeable, his eyes flicking between me and the man, calculating, searching for an angle that no longer existed. "I think there has been a misunderstanding," he said, addressing the man now, not me, and that shift alone told me everything. The way he redirected, the way he softened, the way he tried to reshape the narrative into something manageable, something safe, and the man did not respond, not verbally, he just stood there, present, unmoving, like the outcome had already been decided somewhere else. I could still hear Adrian on the line, quiet, listening, and I realized then that he did not need to be here physically. He never did. Everything was already moving in alignment with him, every piece falling into place without force, without noise, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something settle deep inside me, something that had been restless for too long, a sense of control I had forgotten was possible. "You should go," I said to Jason, my voice calm, not raised, not sharp, just final, and the words hung there between us, simple and absolute. And this time, he did not laugh. Jason did not move right away, and that hesitation told me more than anything he could have said, because this was a man who had always acted first and thought later, a man who filled silence with noise just to stay in control. But now he stood there, caught in a moment that did not belong to him anymore, his eyes shifting between me and the man standing a few feet away, calculating, searching for something that was no longer there. "Emily," he said, softer this time, like he was trying a different approach, like maybe if he changed his tone he could change the outcome. But the sound of my name from him no longer carried weight. It felt distant, disconnected, like it belonged to a version of me that no longer existed. I did not answer. I did not need to, because the space between us had already closed, the decision already made. The man beside him remained still, not blocking, not forcing, just present in a way that made it clear there was no room left for negotiation. "We can talk about this," Jason added, his voice tightening at the edges, and I almost pitied him in that moment. Almost, because I recognized the shift, the way control turns into persuasion when it starts slipping away, the way confidence reshapes itself into something quieter when it is no longer enough. But I had spent too long being on the other side of that, too long being the one who adjusted, who softened, who made space for someone else's comfort at the cost of my own. And something in me refused to do that again. "There is nothing to talk about," I said, steady, clear, and the words felt like they belonged to me in a way they never had before. Jason exhaled slowly, his shoulders lowering just a fraction, like he was finally understanding that this was not a moment he could recover, not with charm, not with pressure, not with the quiet intimidation he had relied on for so long. His gaze flicked once more to the man beside him, then back to me, and I saw it. Acceptance, reluctant and incomplete, but real. "This is not over," he said, the words automatic, more habit than intention, and I held his gaze without flinching, because for the first time, they did not land the way he expected them to. They did not carry the same weight, did not settle into my chest like something inevitable. They just existed, empty, and he seemed to realize that too, because he did not repeat himself, did not push further. He simply turned, slow, controlled, and walked toward the door, not rushed, not forced, but changed. And the moment the door closed behind him, the tension in the room shifted again, easing just enough that I could finally take a full breath. The man beside me stepped back slightly, giving space, his presence still there, but no longer pressing, like the purpose had already been fulfilled. I brought the phone back to my ear, grounding myself again in the steady silence on the other end. "He is gone," I said quietly. And for a second there was nothing, just the faint sound of breathing, controlled, measured. And then Adrian spoke. "Good." A single word, simple, but it carried a weight that settled into the space Jason had left behind, filling it with something calmer, something certain. I leaned against the counter, my legs finally catching up to everything that had just happened, the adrenaline fading into something quieter, something heavier. "You did not have to do this," I said, not as a protest, not exactly. More like an acknowledgement, because I knew what it meant to call him. I knew the line I had crossed the moment I pressed that number, and the silence that followed was different this time. Not distant, not unreadable, something closer, more personal. "You called?" he replied, and that was it. No explanation, no justification, just a statement that somehow answered everything. And I closed my eyes for a brief second, letting that settle, because he was right. I had called, and now nothing felt quite the same anymore. The diner did not return to normal right away. It pretended to. People picked up their forks again. Voices rose just enough to fill the silence. But there was a difference now, something subtle that lingered beneath the surface, like everyone had felt the shift even if they could not explain it. And I stood there behind the counter, the phone still in my hand, my reflection staring back at me from the glass coffee pot. And for a moment I did not recognize the woman looking back, because she was not shrinking, not bracing for what came next. She was standing still, steady, like the ground beneath her finally belonged to her again. "Emily." Adrian's voice came through the line, quieter now, not distant but closer in a way that made it harder to ignore, and I straightened slightly, not because I had to, but because something in me responded to that tone without thinking. "I am here," I said, softer than before, the tension in my chest easing into something more complicated, something I had not felt in a long time. The two men who had entered earlier were already moving away, not drawing attention, not waiting for acknowledgement, just leaving the same way they arrived, quietly, efficiently, like their presence had been a solution rather than a spectacle. And I watched them go, realizing that nothing about this had been accidental, nothing about it had been uncertain. "Are you hurt?" Adrian asked, and the question lingered, simple but weighted, and I glanced down at my hands, at the faint tremor that had finally started to settle, at the way my fingers still held the phone a little too tightly. "No," I answered after a second, because it was true. at least in the way that mattered right now. And there was a pause, not empty, not awkward, something reflective, like he was considering more than just the words I had said. "You should not have needed to call me," he said finally, and I let out a small breath at that. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh, because there was something in those words that carried both distance and something else I could not quite name. "I know," I replied, and I did know. I knew the line I had crossed, the boundary I had stepped over the second I pressed that number, the one I had spent so long building just to stay out of reach of everything he represented. And yet here I was, standing in the middle of it again, not because I had no choice, but because in that moment, it had felt like the only real option. "But you did," he said, not accusing, not questioning, just stating it the way he always did, like facts did not need to be softened to be understood. And I closed my eyes briefly, letting that settle, because he was right. Again, I had called, and that meant something whether I wanted it to or not. I leaned back against the counter, the cool surface grounding me, the noise of the diner slowly weaving back into something recognizable, something ordinary. And for a second, I wished I could step back into that version of things, the simple, predictable rhythm of my life before tonight. But I knew better. I knew that something had shifted, something I could not undo. "Why did you answer?" I asked quietly, the question slipping out before I could stop it, and the silence that followed felt different this time, heavier, more deliberate, like it carried something he did not say easily. "Because it was you," Adrian replied, and the words were simple, but they settled into me in a way that nothing else had tonight. Not loud, not overwhelming, just steady, undeniable, and I opened my eyes, staring at nothing in particular, because I did not know what to do with that, with the weight of it, with the implication that some connections did not fade the way I had hoped they would. "Emily," he said again, my name quieter now, almost careful. "We need to talk." And my grip on the phone tightened just slightly, because I knew what that meant. Not just a conversation, not just words, but everything that came with it, everything I had tried to leave behind. And for the first time since the door had opened and everything changed, I felt that familiar pull again, the one between safety and something far more complicated, and I realized that tonight was not the end of anything. It was the beginning of something I had not planned for. I did not answer him right away, not because I did not hear him, but because I knew exactly what those words meant, and I needed a second to stand still inside them before everything started moving again. "We need to talk" was never just a conversation with Adrian. It was never something simple or easy. It was a door, one that once opened did not close the same way, and I stared at the reflection in the coffee machine again, at the version of me who had just stood her ground, who had not folded, who had not looked away, and I wondered if she was strong enough for what came next. "Emily," he repeated, not impatient, not demanding, just present, and I realized he was waiting for me, not the way people usually wait, not with expectation or pressure, but with certainty, like he already knew I would answer eventually. And maybe that was what unsettled me the most. Not that he had power, but that he understood me in ways I had tried to outgrow. I exhaled slowly, letting the noise of the diner ground me, the hum of the refrigerator, the quiet scrape of a chair across tile, the normal things that reminded me I still had a life outside of this moment. "I cannot do this tonight," I said finally, my voice calm but firm, and there was a pause on the other end, not resistance, not disagreement, just acknowledgement. "You are still at the diner," he said, not asking, and I almost smiled at that, at the way he filled in the blanks without needing confirmation. "Yes," I replied, glancing at the clock above the register, the red numbers blinking 9:17 p.m., later than I had realized, later than I should still be here. "You should not stay there alone after what just happened," he added, and the words carried that same steady concern he had used earlier, not overwhelming, not controlling, just there, consistent, and I felt something shift again, something quieter this time, something I did not immediately push away. "I will be fine," I said, because that was the version of myself I knew how to be, the one who handled things, who moved forward without leaning on anyone else. But the silence that followed told me he did not fully accept that answer, even if he was not going to argue with it. "I will send someone to walk you out," he said, and I shook my head automatically, even though he could not see it. "That is not necessary," I replied, a little quicker than before, because I felt the line again, that boundary I had spent so long building, and I was not ready to let it disappear completely. Not yet. Not all at once. Emily, he said again, my name softer now, not pushing, just reminding, and I closed my eyes for a second, because I knew that tone. I knew what it meant when he chose not to push, when he chose to let me decide. It was never weakness. It was something else, something far more deliberate. I will be careful, I said instead, adjusting my grip on the phone, and this time he did not respond immediately, the silence stretching just enough to feel like a choice. And then, all right, he said, simple, accepting, and that should have made it easier, that should have closed the moment cleanly, but it did not, because now the space between us felt unfinished, like something still needed to be said, something I was not sure I was ready to hear. I turned slightly, reaching for a clean towel just to give my hands something to do, something normal, something grounding. I have to get back to work, I said, the words practical, familiar. And there was another pause, shorter this time, like he understood what I was doing, what I was trying to hold on to. We will talk, he said, not a question, not a command, just a fact, and my chest tightened just slightly at that, because I knew he was right. This was not something that would fade away overnight. Not anymore. Good night, Adrian, I said quietly, the name feeling unfamiliar and familiar at the same time, and for a second there was nothing. Just that steady presence on the other end. And then, softer than anything he had said before, good night, Emily. And the line went quiet, but the weight of it stayed with me long after the call ended. I stood there for a moment after the call ended, the phone still warm in my hand, like it was holding on to something I was not ready to let go of, and the diner slowly pulled me back in, the rhythm of it returning piece by piece, orders being called, plates clinking, someone laughing too loudly in the corner like nothing had happened, like the last 10 minutes had not shifted something fundamental in the air, but I knew better. I felt it in the way my chest had not fully settled, in the way my thoughts kept circling back to the same point, the same realization I had been avoiding since I pressed that number. I pushed myself off the counter and moved again, muscle memory taking over, refilling coffee, wiping down surfaces, nodding at customers like everything was exactly as it had been before, and maybe to them it was. Maybe nothing had changed at all, but inside me something had moved, something quiet but undeniable, and I could not pretend I did not feel it. I glanced at the door, without meaning to, half expecting it to open again, half expecting something else to step through and pull me further into a world I had worked so hard to stay away from. But it stayed closed, just a door, just glass and metal and a small bell that had already stopped moving, and I let out a breath I did not realize I was holding, because for now, at least for tonight, it was over. The shift dragged on longer than it should have, or maybe it just felt that way because my mind would not stop. Replaying everything, Jason's face when the name landed, the silence on the phone before Adrian spoke, the way the room had changed without anyone raising their voice, and I kept coming back to the same thought. Power did not need to be loud to be absolute, and that scared me more than anything else, because I knew exactly what that kind of power could do. I had seen it before, I had lived too close to it, and I had promised myself I would never stand in its shadow again. Closing time finally came, the lights dimmed slightly, chairs flipped onto tables, the last customer stepping out into the night, and I gathered my things slowly, deliberately, like I was giving myself time to think, to decide something I had not fully put into words yet. My phone sat in my bag, quiet now, but it did not feel like a normal silence. It felt like a pause, like something waiting, and I knew he meant what he said. We would talk. Not if, not maybe, but when, and that certainty settled into me in a way that made it impossible to ignore. I stepped outside, the cool night air hitting my skin, grounding me in something real, something simple. The streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement, cars passing in the distance. The familiar hum of a city that did not stop for anyone. And for a second, I just stood there, breathing it in, reminding myself that this was my life, this quiet, ordinary version of it. Not the one Adrian existed in, not the one I had just touched again. I started walking toward my car, my steps steady, measured, but my mind was anything but calm. Because the truth I had been avoiding all night finally settled in, clear and unavoidable. I had not just called for help. I had reopened something unfinished, something that had never really gone away no matter how far I tried to. Put it behind me, and as I reached for my car door, my phone vibrated softly in my bag. Just once, a single notification, and I froze for a second before pulling it out, my heart picking up in a way I could not control. A message, no name needed, just a number I knew by memory even if I had not seen it in years, and the words were simple, like everything else about him, precise, controlled, impossible to misinterpret. Get home safe, Emily. And I stared at the screen a second longer than I should have, because it was not a command, not a warning, just a statement that somehow carried both. And as I slid into my car and closed the door behind me, I realized something I could not undo. He did not need to be here to change everything. He already had.